Zdravo! Aktivnosti studenta, posete, predavanja obeležili su nedelju za nama. Ovo je vaš vodič kroz Internacionalni univerzitet u Novom Pazaru. Dobrodošli! Studentski parlament pod pokroviteljstvom Internacionalnog univerziteta u Novom Pazaru organizovao je 8. marta na Dan žena podelu karanfila svim novopazarkama na gradskom šetalištu. Na ovu ideju došli su studenti, a univerzitet je pružio podršku u realizaciji i organizaciji. U narednom periodu Internacionalni univerzitet u Novom Pazaru imaće niz aktivnosti u kojima će i naši sugrađani biti u prilici da učestvuju. Jedna od njih je svakako i Dan univerziteta 30. marta, kada će biti dodeljene diplome još jednoj generaciji studenta.
U povodu 8. marta, Međunarodnog dana žena, ulice Novog Pazara danas su prepune cvijeća. U pešačkoj zoni u Novom Pazaru danas je bio postavljen štand Internacionalnog univerziteta, a studenti ovog univerziteta želeli su da pripadnicama ljepšeg pola uljepšaju dan tako što su im poklanjali po jedan cvijet.
Studentski parlament pod pokroviteljstvom Internacionalnog univerziteta u Novom Pazaru deli danas svim novopazarkama ovde na šetalištu povodom 8. marta, dakle Dana žena, simboličan poklon, dakle po jedan karanfil dobile su sve naše sugrađanke koje su se, eto, da kažemo, u ovo vreme zadesile na ovom mestu. Ja bih da istaknem da je ovo ideja studenta, da je univerzitet podržao tu njihovu ideju kroz, dakle, organizaciju i pomoć u organizaciji ovog događaja. Ovim putem su studenti našeg univerziteta želeli da pošalju jednu generalnu poruku, dakle da ovo treba da učine svi, kako drugi studenti, tako i svi oni da poklone pažnju, i to ne samo danas, svojim majkama, sestrama, devojkama, ćerkama, dakle svim pripadnicama lepšeg pola. Ja bih još da istaknem da je ovo samo jedna u nizu aktivnosti koje Internacionalni univerzitet u Novom Pazaru planira, da je recimo jedno od sledećih Dana univerziteta 30. marta, kojom prilikom će biti, dakle, i dodeljene diplome novoj generaciji naših studenta.
Studenti su ovim željeli da daju podršku svim ženama u njihovoj borbi za ravnopravnost, emancipaciju i mir.
Studentski parlament Internacionalnog univerziteta u Novom Pazaru je zajedno sa samim univerzitetom došao na tu ideju da na današnji dan, to je 8. mart, nekima od nama je žao što nismo mogli svim damama, ali eto nekima, bar njih, smo ulepšali današnji dan tako što smo podelili nekoliko karanfila i drago nam je što smo, eto, kao što sam već rekao, bar nekim od njih ulepšali današnji dan. Također želimo svakako da čestitamo 8. mart svim pripadnicama lepšeg pola i da nam uvijek budete tako lepe kao što jeste.
Život čine male stvari, poruka je studenta Internacionalnog univerziteta u Novom Pazaru, koji su danas bili na štandu u pešačkoj zoni.
Iskoristila bih samo priliku da se zahvalim Internacionalnom univerzitetu u Novom Pazaru što nam je omogućio ovaj štand danas ovde i nadam se da smo nekom ulepšali dan i zaista želim samo da čestitam svim damama 8. mart.
8. mart kao praznik pod nazivom Međunarodni dan žena postoji od 1975. godine, koja je bila proglašena Međunarodnom godinom žena, a 2 godine kasnije Generalna skupština Ujedinjenih nacija je rezolucijom proglasila 8. mart danom ženskih prava i međunarodnog mira.
U zvaničnoj poseti Internacionalnom univerzitetu u Novom Pazaru boravila je delegacija ambasade Sjedinjenih Američkih Država u Srbiji, predvođena ambasadorom, njegovom ekscelencijom Michaelom Kirbyjem. Delegaciju je primio rektor univerziteta, profesor dr. Mevlut Dudić, a nakon toga ambasador je održao predavanje studentima univerziteta na temu ekonomija u Sjedinjenim Američkim Državama.
Uvažene koleginice i kolege, cijenjeni gosti, dame i gospodo, koristim priliku na samom početku da vas najtoplije poselamim i pozdravim. Zadovoljstvo mi je da imamo danas radost da je u posjeti našem univerzitetu visoka delegacija Američke ambasade u Beogradu, predvođena prvim čovjekom ambasade, gospodin Mike Kirby, ambasador Sjedinjenih Američkih Država u Beogradu. Na samom početku njegove karijere ambasadora u Beogradu imao je razumijevanja i potrebe da posjeti i naš univerzitet. duboko sam mu u svoje ime i u vaše ime zahvalan. Kao i svaki Amerikanac svjestan je što znači imati obrazovane ljude, a imajući u vidu da je američka ekonomija danas najjača u svijetu, s pravom smo se odlučili da govori o ekonomiji u Americi. Ovdje su, uvaženi ambasadore, naši studenti, većina njih sa ekonomskog fakulteta, a i drugih departmana, odnosno fakulteta. Svakako, pošto ništa slučajno nema, ovdje je jedna naša vrlo značajna delegacija s prostora Sandžaka koja živi u Njujorku, predvođena gospodinom Serdanovićem, vrlo uspješni biznismen u Njujorku. Govorio sam vam u rektoratu zašto je naša takva sudbina da oni napuste ovo područje i da se osele da žive u daleku Ameriku. Tamo su uspješni, tamo su se dobro snašli. Što se nisu ovdje snašli, ne bi o tome da govorim. Ali je, evo, dobra šansa i prilika da u narednih 20 minuta, a nakon toga će biti predavanja, moguće postaviti nekoliko pitanja, da se ambasador, gospodin Kirby, obrati vama, govori na zadatu temu. Ja još jednom želim da se zahvalim našem ambasadoru, a prije nego li bude uzeo riječ, we have a gifts from our university, Department of Arts. It's our picture from our professor Mehmet Slezović. This is something special for you. Before your lecture, I think I'd like to give you. Mr. Ambassador, you're welcome. Floor is yours.
And by coincidence, I happen to have a gift for the rector. It's on American Art Deco. I've had the opportunity just briefly to walk through the halls of this building and get to enjoy the art. So I hope the rector enjoys a little bit of American art as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have to admit that I had a fever yesterday and I have a fever today, and so rather than spend all of this time hearing myself speak, I'm going to speak briefly and then ask a bunch of questions, or I hope answer, but let me tell you my method with one of these things. If people don't ask me questions, I call on people to insist that they ask questions. So what I would like to do is talk. I was told that I ought to talk about a business experience. So I thought that in honor of the gentleman from New York, I would talk a bit about my great-grandfather, who was a Jew from southern Poland, which was then Austrian Galicia. I think you had some Austro-Hungarian nearby anyway. And he and I guess my great-grandmother decided that they didn't want to have him spend 10 years in the Austrian army, and like many people who came to the United States, he fled the draft, a long tradition in the United States. Well, he went to New York City, to a place for any of you who are students of that. It was called Hell's Kitchen. It was a pretty tough neighborhood. And he was an upholsterer. That was his trade. He made pieces of furniture. Well, at some point, there was a strike. And I'm pleased to say that my great-grandfather was not happy with those people. We call in English scabs, the people who take the jobs of the people who were working there at wages that they don't feel are sufficient for their family. So I got to admit that my great-grandfather beat up some of these scabs. And when the strike was over, I'll introduce you to a new term in English, blackballed. He was, it's illegal, but people do it. He was blackballed, which meant that he could not get a job in upholstery in New York. So he said, so what do I do? So he went to Cleveland. He had a family member there, which is, I guess, the way most people immigrate. They have somebody they know in a town. And it turned out that he was also blackballed in Cleveland. This is a bad guy, you don't want him. So he said, now, damn, I'm sorry, I don't always speak sense. What the heck can I do? And he said, I'm in Cleveland. And I look around and we got these Hungarians and we got these Croats and we got these Serbs and we've got all these people. And what do they need? They need Slivovitz. I'm telling you the truth. My great-grandfather opened the Hungarian-American Distillery Company. Now, why did he call it the Hungarian-American Distillery Company when he was a Jew from Poland? Because Cleveland was the second largest Hungarian city after Budapest. And he figured, why not have, as a business, a title that's going to encourage the largest potential group of customers to buy his stuff. So he made a distillery, and this was about 1906 or so. And I still have some books for when he bought fruit. And he, of course, bought the proper fruit for making Slivovitz or the stuff from apricots or pears or whatever. He bought the fruit that nobody else wanted to eat because it was a little towards the rotten end. I think it's already started its process. So he made the company, and then we had something called prohibition, where the people who didn't like to drink thought that those of us who do like to drink shouldn't drink. And so they passed an amendment to our Constitution, which is really hard to do, that none of us could drink. So my great-grandfather had to sell his business. He had to close it down, and he had to break up his still. So he said, now I got this big space, and I don't have a job. What can I do? Somebody came to him and said, Heinrich, I want to rent your place for a laundry. And then he said, okay. And he checked out his credit to make sure he would pay. But the bank didn't check out his credit well enough. So the guy went into the laundry business, and within about a year and a half was bankrupt. So my great-grandfather's taken a look at all of this new laundry equipment in his room and calls the bank and says, get this stuff out of my building. And the bank's looking at expensive equipment that's really expensive to take apart and move, and then there's nobody really to sell it to. And they say, no, well, he said, no, just get it out. And they said, well, Heinrich, you were in business, why don't you go into the laundry business? He said, I was in the distillery business. Why should I get into the laundry business? He's watching the price go down. At first they were saying, why don't you buy it at, say, 80 cents. Do you know the term 80 cents on the dollar? Yeah, so 80 cents on the dollar, and he's going, that's crazy. In the end of the negotiation, he got it for 10 cents on the dollar. Okay, so the piece of advice on that is that if you can get a good deal on your capital equipment, do. It makes the rest of your business easier to turn a profit on. So he went into the laundry business, and he didn't necessarily know anything about laundry, but he knew something about business. He had been successful for a certain number of years, and there was unlikely to be a constitutional amendment banning laundries. So he was pretty safe that the business wasn't going to have a problem. So my grandfather was born in 1903. He started working for his dad in 1918 because he was one of 13 kids. He was, I guess, the second of 13. 11 grew up. And at my grandmother's funeral when she was 94 and my grandfather was only 92, he had 7 of his brothers and sisters there at the funeral, the youngest of whom was 70. So the rest of them did okay. So he went into the laundry business, and my grandfather drove a truck for him. Now, I mentioned that my grandfather was Jewish, but I didn't mention that my grandmother was Catholic. And you have some issues occasionally here about religion. Well, my grandfather was then the eldest living son, and he fell in love with my grandmother, who, my God, was a year and a half older than he was. In 1924, this was really not good. A good Jewish boy in love with a Catholic girl who was older. So he said, well, Mom, I love her, and they went off and got married anyway. So his mom sat Shiva for him. Now, I don't know if any of you know what Shiva is, but it's the prayers for the dead. As far as his mom was concerned, he was dead. He continued, however, to work for his father. I mean, there's business and then there's family, and my grandfather was pretty good at business. So I'll give you an example. Coats. You know how we have different kinds of coats, and some women have cloth coats and some women have fur coats, and they're still the ones with a little fur around the collar. The laundry at that time, it cost to process it the same amount of money, whether it was fur, cloth, or cloth and fur. But my grandfather said, well, okay, but the people who have a fur coat want to pay more money, so why don't I just charge them twice as much? Because they have a fur coat, they clearly have some money. They want special care. He's going to treat it just as well as he did any other coat, but you know, it comes back in good condition. So he charged double for the one with the fur, 50% more for the one with the fur collar, and it cost him the same amount. I think a lesson from this is charge your customers what they want to pay and hope you make a profit on that. You can underprice your goods. If you sell your goods at too little, people aren't going to think it's good enough. So my grandfather drove a truck for his dad for a while, and then he and 3 friends bought their own laundry. And then my grandfather stayed in the laundry business until 1959, at which point he went out of business in part because he had changed sides from being, my great-grandfather had been, you know, sort of beating up the scabs. Well, I have to admit that my grandfather bought the union, and he couldn't afford to buy the union anymore. And there was this newfangled thing called a washing machine that people were having in homes, and so the laundry business was tough, so he went out of that. But he was pretty successful in his business. He did the business, and my grandmother took care of the money. And over time, she bought about 4 apartment buildings for people to live in, and did that kind of stuff. So turning in a small business by taking advantage of an accident, you know, 2 accidents. He couldn't stay in his father couldn't stay in the upholstery business, and then he couldn't stay in the liquor business. Actually, truth be told, he was offered to go into the liquor business by the mob in the 1920s. Because he actually knew how to make stuff that people could drink without getting poisoned. And I wish to say that he was a fine, upstanding, honest person and said, oh, I will never break the law. What they decided on the family is that since he wasn't born in America, at that point, if he had been caught, he would have been deported. And so he decided it wouldn't be good to be deported. He was a little less concerned about honoring the law, I have to admit. So with that as a story from my own family about a business that did well enough for a long time, my grandfather at some point decided that he should really be driving a Cadillac because that in the 1940s and 50s was the car to drive. So he got a Cadillac for a guy who, and I'm sorry to tell the record, he only had 8th grade education. On the other hand, both my mother and her brother had university education. My grandparents decided that when they got married, they wanted to have not 11 kids, or not 13, but they wanted a paid-up house, and they wanted their kids to have a university education. They knew that the value of that was tremendously important. So with that, I've spoken for about 12 minutes, and so now I would love to entertain questions.
afternoon, sir, and welcome to the university. My name is Ivan Jankovic, and I'm a student of 40th studies in English language. I must say that it's a great honor to have you here with us today. Actually, I have one question, which is not just a question for me. It's a question in the name of all the students from this university. There is currently a lot of political pressure on this university. So is there something that you can help us with as ambassador of the United States of America to keep, to ensure that politics is separate from education?
Well, I got from the rector a letter, fortunately for me in English, explaining the trials and tribulations that the university has gone through. And I will study it. I expect in the next couple of months to meet with the Minister of Education to have conversations. And included in that, I'll ask the status of this university and ask him, depending on what this says, I've been told, and I will check, that there are certain norms within the rules of Serbia of how quickly things should be treated. And that it appears that this, from the information I've been given today, has been treated outside the norms. I can't guarantee a success. I'm merely the American ambassador. I do have conversations with people from time to time. You may occasionally see them in the news. I guess last week I met with the president, and earlier this week I met with Mr. Vučić. So I do meet with people from time to time. But generally what I try to do is ask Serbia to honor its own rules rather than a set of rules that we might impose. But if this is being accredited as consistent with the rules, that's what I will ask. I've spent a lot of time here talking about rule of law. And what I understand from the rector in the conversation we had when I came here is that the university isn't asking for exception to the law. It's only asking for the application of the law. So if that is the case, then it's consistent with what I've said. Please use the law that you have in the way it's supposed to be done so that people are treated equally before the law. Okay?
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sandra Jondic, and I'm a student of 4th year of English language and literature as well. And my question is about economy. Do you find as Embassy of America, as Ambassador of America, Sandvak as an interesting region for investment and something like that?
I came down here and I had a conversation with a variety of people, including one of your professors who has a company that's in the fashion business. And it's my understanding that jeans are something you do well in textiles of that kind, working with that. And I know it's been difficult. We, the United States, have tried to help with a number of these businesses. We have a thing called the cluster. We've helped some of your jean manufacturers go to Russia, to Poland, to Germany, to expand their markets. Because frankly, if you just stay solely in the Serbian market, there's a limit to your ability to grow. Then the question is, why should somebody invest here rather than someplace else? I think you have some options. You have a ton of young people who don't have jobs. But you do have some issues with infrastructure. I've been told that, for instance, you didn't have heat a lot of the winter. It's my understanding that your waste treatment is not treated. That in the summer, maybe you don't have running water every place. You all have to do something about some of that. I spoke yesterday to a manufacturer of jeans who had a potential client from Norway. You know, the Norwegians have a lot of money. They got this oil stuff and not very many Norwegians, so they were good potential customers. But when they asked about they care about the environment. And when they asked about some of the environmental protections and they got to wastewater not treated, he said, enough, I can't do business with you. So I think it could be a good place to invest. You have some pluses. You have also the design school here, for instance, so people can figure out how to design things and maybe have the taste to know what people will buy. You have a tradition in that kind of manufacturing. But you have some infrastructure that really does have to be worked on. I don't know if I were a Turkish businessman, and you guys don't listen to this, but I would want to actually be warm for most of the winter. I'd probably not like what I flush down the toilet to go straight into the river. And so, you know, you got to work a little on that. You know, I think you want honest answers rather than just stuff. So, I mean, I would say to people, there are real opportunities, but you have to overcome certain stuff. So, for instance, that Norwegian customer would have been perfectly happy to buy if the manufacturer installed his own equipment to purify the water. But that gets pretty expensive. So, you know, you have to figure out how you're going to do it. I also hear about ecotourism, but I gotta admit that when I go around here and take a look at the rivers and take a look at the dirt and take a look at all the crap you guys throw on the ground, I go, what do you mean by ecotourism? I'm not gonna come here and enjoy a nice farm if I see 6 plastic bags and, you know, plastic bottles and cans and all the other stuff. So you got to think, you know, and that's a mentality. The trash doesn't come from the moon, it comes from you guys. And, you know, maybe getting some youth involvement in cleaning an area and getting some civic spirit. I mean, in the States, look, in the States, we don't want to pay taxes to a government that's going to keep a certain percentage and then not do much with it. Although, of course, I'm well worth the money you pay in taxes. Maybe, you know, we cleaned up a lot of the highways in the States by private companies or student groups or scout groups or universities taking a stretch and cleaning it themselves. I mean, it's your environment. It's not the city's environment. It's not your parents' environment. It's yours. And if you want to do ecotourism, I would say clean the place up a bit. Now I think you are next.
Hi, my name is Smiley Stanovic. I'm an American citizen. I enjoy living in the United States. I live in New York. I came here with 3 of my friends who are businessmen and very good businessmen that came from Sanja, from this region. I wanted to ask you if it's anyhow that you can help give a message of America to this country, especially to the Sanja. You just mentioned that it's very poor beginning for investing in people. I left here 23 years ago, and I'm a very successful managing agent. And right now I hold the position Director of Management in a company that holds 100 buildings. If I was here, and I'm 43, most likely I would be till this day's jobless. I wouldn't have a job. So I'm lucky I went to the country that doesn't ask you what religion you belong to or what ethnic group you belong to. If you're a hard worker, don't matter what your name is and what you're about. If you're
doesn't even make a difference if you have an accent in English.
Correct. But you have opportunity for all. And I'm very happy that I live in the most beautiful and peaceful country. And as ambassador, I believe the job is to deliver the message to the Serbian people to recognize this beautiful university and to help people get better jobs and, just like you said, clean up the country and like other investment people from other countries to come invest here.
Thank you. If I can respond a bit, one of the things that I've been intrigued by, I've been here since September, and you know, I didn't really know much about Serbia. I know a fair amount of the world. This is now the 16th country I've lived in, so I've been around a bit. But your image outside of Serbia is not necessarily the reality that I see. And that is that you have a reputation, the country, Serbia, not necessarily the Sanjak or any particular person, of rather being only Serbs, only Orthodox, and not particularly welcoming of somebody who is neither one of those. Or maybe even not all that welcoming. But the reality on the ground is very different. I went to Vojvodina, and in the various assemblies in Vojvodina, you have city and government, the Vojvodina province, you have 21 languages used in the assemblies. That is a multicultural, multi-ethnic country. This is, but yet it doesn't come across that way. And I'm not quite sure why. It's also a welcoming place. Look, the reputation, if you get a last popularity thing I saw, Americans got 11% support, and we got 12% in Pakistan. Now, we're noted for not being particularly popular in Pakistan, and we were more popular there than here. It's sort of tough. So maybe my influence isn't that big. But, you know, it's a really fascinating place. People are nice. I've been treated nicely by everybody here. I may represent an evil place that bombed, and I have been told a couple of times that we bombed this country. I can't change the history. I can only worry about and try to deal with the future. I can't change the past. Although around here, a lot of people dwell a lot in the past and not so much in the future. I'm in Belgrade. It's a multi-ethnic city. There are people from Sanjak, there are people from South Serbia, there are people from all over Vojvodina. They say that there are more Montenegrins live in Belgrade than live in Montenegro. And it's a multicultural city, multi-ethnic city, and it doesn't necessarily have that reputation. It's also, I understand, a really great party city. I've been told I think that they were chosen the best party city in Europe. I think I'm a little old to go to some of these places on the Sava, but how do you get out that side? How do you change the image of the country? Because the image isn't positive, but the reality is more so. Now, then the other question is, how do you get people to be tolerant, one person at a time? I didn't know you were going to ask this question, but I then told you the story about my grandfather and my grandmother. You know, his mom sat Shiva for him. His dad still had him work. You know, how do you stop that in any place? And it takes education. That's why you have universities. That's why you have teachers. And it takes hard work. People have to say, look, that person's different from me. Good. Who would want a world full of me's? You know, truth be told, the world is more fun with different people around. Now, there are a couple of them where we could probably all agree we'd rather not have them, but what the heck? You have to rejoice in the difference of people, and that hasn't taken a deep root here. And I'm not sure it's taken a deep root in any particular corner of Serbia. To tell you the truth, I'm not persuaded that some of the minorities particularly like the majority. And I think the country will be better off if everybody gets along. Another question? Yes, back here.
I'm Anela Feratovic, and I'm a student of economic science, and I'm on my third year. And this is my question. It is the fact that Bosniaks in Sanjak live in underdevelopment regions, and that Bosniaks have suffered more than 10 genocides up to now. How can I, my friends, and all of the Bosniaks can be sure that this will not happen again? And is there any international institutional protection for Bosniaks and other minorities?
I have been working hard with this government to take a look at what is the future course of Serbia. It is not for me to choose, but I have a mouth, and I, as you can tell, use it from time to time. And I have said, why don't you take a look, and I think they have independently arrived at the same thing. Why don't you resolve the Kosovo issue? Why don't you put that behind? Because it is holding the country back. Now, I'm not getting into right or wrong, because there are different views on whether Kosovo should be independent. My country believes it should. We have told the government here you don't have to recognize that, but Kosovo isn't part of the country for a practical matter. So why don't you resolve that? And we hope, I hope, that that opens the door to the European Union. Now, my own view of the European Union is that tolerance is fairly large there. I mean, let's take a look at France and Germany. For many centuries, the national sport of both was to fight the other. I lived 5 years in France. I lived 6 years in Poland. The Poles and the Germans used to fight each other. I don't think anybody worries about that now. You have, my daughter lives in Madrid. She's married to a Spaniard, and there's some issues about whether Catalonia will stay or go. But there's not a fear that there's going to be shooting. And so I think that you being in the EU would, on the ethnic guarantees that you're looking for, put a set of requirements that help minorities a lot. And that is a set of, I believe, international guarantees that are helpful. Now, the EU isn't perfect. Roma have discrimination in many EU countries, so the EU isn't necessarily going to end all discrimination. But I think it will make this a more stable, safer place for minorities to be. I also think it'll help create the conditions where investors are much more satisfied. Oh, this is an EU country? Oh, that's pretty good. And I mean, I think right now you have advantages that you're not, because you can export to Russia and to Turkey without having to pay the duties. But I think there are a lot of pluses that come from the EU. So if you see people like me who seem to be interfering on what you're doing, I'm trying to say, the past is the past, let's move on to the future. And that future could be good in the EU. And I think for minorities, it gives you something and a set of comfort, I believe, that some of you feel you do, that you lack. So one more question, if I may. This gentleman here.
Hello. Ja sam student fakulteta za kompjuterske nauke.
How can a computer guy not speak English?
Ja sam student fakulteta za kompjuterske nauke. Imam jedno pitanje. Ovdje u Novom Pazaru ima više od 30 diplomiranih inženjera za kompjuterske nauke na birou rada, odnosno zapošljeni. S obzirom da imamo fakultet za kompjuterske nauke, taj broj će se konstantno povećavati. Pa kakve su mogućnosti američkih kompjuterskih kompanija da iskoriste ovu situaciju za zajednički interes?
I can tell you a couple of things of what we're trying to do, and then I can't tell an investor. Do you understand when I speak English? Okay. National Cash Register, NCR. You may not know who they are, but if you ever use an ATM, chances are it's their machine. They have a center now in Belgrade that opened 18 months ago and hired 300 people in the IT sector to help repair people on the phone know how to repair the machine. They were in my office earlier this week, Monday, and they are going to hire 300 more people, all of whom have an IT background. They're very happy with the people. I'm going with, at this point, I'm planning on going with the Prime Minister and maybe Minister Lajec to the United States to talk with IT companies about the possibilities here. What you all have to then do, so we're trying to do a little something. I think 600 jobs doesn't do you necessarily good because you're in Novi Pazar and they're in Belgrade. But then you have to figure out how you can persuade a company that gets to choose which country they're going to. In this case, Serbia is the start, but why should they come here rather than Belgrade, Novi Sad, Niš? And that is part of what your city authorities and others have a responsibility, and maybe some of your ministers in Belgrade, to sort of figure out what's good here and figure out why people should invest here. Because more and more people are sold on Serbia, but they need to know why they should come to Novi Pazar so that they can hire you when you graduate or some of your friends. So we're doing some things generally, but I did talk about the infrastructure. I've heard that the electricity here is pretty bad, that it fluctuates like mad. If I'm doing IT stuff, I don't want to kill my computers by bad electricity, you know? So there are some steps that y'all have to do before I'm going to tell them. I mean, when I hear that the electricity is the worst in the country, it's going to be hard for me to persuade an IT company that this is the best place to come. I mean, you have to have expensive transformers, and you have to have battery things and all of the other way that you clean it up rather than just relying on the line, and then it adds to your costs. Getting back to the story of my great-grandfather got the equipment at 10 cents on the dollar. So thank you very much for entertaining me. Thanks for the picture, wherever that went. And I promise at some point I'll come back and bother you again.
Bilo bi to sve od nas za ovo izdanje emisije sa Univerziteta. Pratite nas putem web i Facebook stranice. Do gledanja.